Many of you, most of you won't know me. A couple of people in the audience do. So let me just give you a very brief background. I have been developing software for 30 years now, which puts me somewhere between Bob Martin and Kevlin. And I used to, for my sins, roll out heavyweight structured methodologies to people. And that didn't work so well. So I got interested in how you could do things differently. And I met this guy, because I started to program in Smalltalk. I got involved in the Smalltalk community, and I met a guy called Kent Beck. And Kent told me what he was doing at Chrysler. And I became a reviewer of the very first book on extreme programming, and I have been doing extreme programming ever since then. So I think of extreme programming as it was in 1999 with some core technical practices and a bunch of other things as well. So we're going to talk about what I've been doing, well, what I've been involved with for the last 18 months, which is Unruly. And Unruly has a long history of XP as well. But let's first, who, just out of curiosity, because this sometimes surprises me, who knows of Unruly already? Fascinating. Okay, because I expected 0, right? Well, actually, I expected 1 because there's somebody from Unruly in the audience. But okay, so let's just do what's Unruly. Is it going to kick in now? No, it's not. We tested it. It doesn't want to go. All right. There's a lovely little video there. We had the sound levels right, but it's not going to cooperate now. So we'll just move on. Unruly is a video marketplace for advertising, online advertising. So when you bring up a web page, if there's a video ad playing on that web page, there's a very good chance we were involved in the distribution of that ad. Okay. So we match up buyers and sellers in that marketplace. We are not a large company, but we are not a small company either. We have 320 people in 22 countries. My development team, and I'm the CTO. The development team is based here in London almost exclusively. I have a couple of people in other locations, but mostly here. We use lean and agile principles throughout the organization, and you can see that we have been growing quite a lot. So back when I joined in April 2017, we had in the order of 35 people in development, and now we have about 75. We're organized into a bunch of small teams, up to 10. Some teams are smaller. The Unruly as a company was founded in 2006. The founders were from ConExtra. Who has seen the story format as a I want so that? Right, so that informally is the ConExtra format. ConExtra were involved in XP very early. 3 people came from ConExtra to found Unruly. So XP principles have been part of Unruly since 2006, though they are applied more rigorously in what we call ProDev, product development, than in the rest of the organization. And on top of that, we now incorporate ideas from lean startups. So we will have people talking about MVPs and production experiments, and that sort of conversation is pretty normal. So let's compare what Unruly does to a standard XP checklist. And I was worried that people wouldn't know what XP was, but a couple of people before me have helped out with that by showing all the XP practices. Yes, we do daily stand-ups, we do test-driven development, we do pair programming. We have whole teams. Every team has a product manager, not someone directly from the business, but someone who is specifically focused on the non-technical aspects of what we're doing. We do continuous integration, but probably not as you recognize it. We deploy from our workstations to our production environments. We don't have anything in between. We do refactoring / design improvement, small releases, collective code ownership, simple design, all of these things. We don't talk about whether those things make sense or not. So I've been involved in XP since '99, and most of my career has been trying to convince people who didn't do Agile or XP that it was a reasonably good idea. At Unruly, I don't have to have those conversations. It's incredibly liberating to not worry about that and move on to the next stage. Physically, we're a little different to what you might expect. All of our development happens with pairs. So we have workstations set up for people to pair at. Dual screens, one of them very large, usually another satellite screen so that we can have mobs easily. Everybody gets good visibility. People don't have desks. as a rule. I do, because I don't write any code, so I usually have a place to go. But even I don't sit there very much. I tend to just wander around the building and sit wherever I can find a space. The space is very flexible. You can see that everything has wheels. And though people don't have desks, they do get possessive about their chairs. So if you wander into my area, you will see that every chair has a name on the back of it. And when you come back from vacation, your very first job is to find your chair. And we have lots of production monitoring. If you look in those diagrams, you can see screens up high, or at least in the one on the top. Those are our production monitoring screens. They're displaying graphs and other statistics. And sometimes that's the very first place we see that we have a production problem, is because people are looking up going, what's that? That looks weird. Okay. Things that we don't have that you might expect in extreme programming or an agile shop. We don't have fixed iterations. We don't do the planning game. We don't have CI servers. There's no Jenkins or whatever the alternatives would be. We don't use system metaphor, which is a key XP practice, but I don't think that makes us unusual because I don't think anybody has system metaphors. We don't have any backlog per se. We don't have Jira. We don't have any of those tools. We don't do backlog grooming. We just keep that stuff in people's heads, and when it becomes important, we put it in Trello, and that usually represents what's going on in the next couple of weeks, and there might be 10 or 12 things in Trello, maybe. So we worry, I'll come on to this a little bit later, we care a lot about what we don't do. We maximize our velocity by not doing stuff at all. And we do talk about estimates, but we generally don't talk about story points very much, and we talk about velocity even less. We all just sort of say, look, how long is it going to take the team to get this done? Oh, a couple of weeks. Okay, fine, let's move on. So how does this intersect with me speaking at a craftsmanship conference? So let me talk about craft from an Unruly perspective. This I repeat over and over again. I have a number of, my job is gradually becoming distilled down to about 5 or 6 phrases I just have to repeat every single day. This is one of them. What's the role of product development? The product development's role is to sustainably deliver value to Unruly in the short, the medium, and the long term. And I actually pulled this from another organization in my past and have carried it with me from place to place now. That's all subject to interpretation, of course, but broadly speaking, short-term is features, long-term is making sure that people are upskilling and understanding what's coming down the pipe and what things we're not doing might be relevant in the future, and medium-term is making sure that everything is malleable, because we are a long-term business. Right? So it's no good to deliver a whole bunch of features and then be unsustainable in 3 months or 6 months and have to go back and do a lot of work. We need to continually keep up with our competitors, and that's a key part of medium-term success. And I will say to everyone, including the board, the Unruly board that I presented to a couple of weeks ago, like, we need to succeed in all 3 of those timeframes. It's critical. So craft helps us do that. Though we don't use the words craft, we just talk about doing well. So here's elements that might be related to a craft perspective. We do what we call gold cards. This is akin to 20% time, but for every developer has 20% of their week to do things that they think will provide direct or indirect value to Unruly at their discretion. Pretty much the only constraint is you don't own the IP at the end. But you can open source it, that's fine. But you can't build your own business in your 20% time. That would be bad. But people do open source work, they learn a new language. Everyone also has a conference allowance and a laptop allowance. So we expect people to go to conferences, but this is in addition to doing that. But some people use this sort of to go to another conference and on their own dime. Yeah, so we also have a mentoring program internally. It's not mandatory, but we also try to pair up junior and senior people who have different needs. We pair on everything that goes into production, and I'll talk a little more about pairing because it's a really good example of some interesting tensions. We also mob, and our interest in mobbing is cyclic. Sometimes we do it more than others. We don't have rigid deadlines. Like, we don't say we're going to deliver this by Friday most of the time. Sometimes we have a contractual arrangement that implies a rigorous deadline, but most of the time we're saying, okay, how long will it take to do this properly? We care a lot about psychological safety, which people should be aware of from Google studies, but the idea that everybody in the team should feel safe to say what they think without feeling that there will be ramifications related to that. We really want to make sure that we get everyone's opinion, and that, to use an expression I learned from somebody else, we get the union of our knowledge, not just the intersection of our ignorance, like the things that we're scared of. Right? We want to get everyone's opinions. We worry about diversity, worry in the sense of we don't think we are diverse enough. We want to get multiple opinions and perspectives, and we think that having a broad range of skills and backgrounds helps with that. And there's plenty of research to back that up. As a company as a whole, our goal is that an Unruly office should reflect the diversity of the environment in which it's embedded. So that means different things in Hamburg and New York than it does in London, but that's our general goal. And you can see, starting back in 2017, that graph is the percentage of females in our team over time, which is not the only aspect of diversity we care about, but it's one that's easy to track and present some numbers about. And you can see that we've put some effort into changing that over time. All my team leads also have an explicit responsibility to have conversations around development goals for the people. So every so often I will talk to my team leads, we'll go through everybody in the team and say, what are their development goals? Are we helping them move towards that? So all of that is, from my perspective, part of craft and helping people do well. Things about Unruly that may surprise you. Our experience over 12 years is that it's actually easy to maintain practices. It's easy to keep everybody pairing. It's easy to keep stand-ups going. It's easy to do TDD. What's really hard is to consistently convey the intent of those things so that they don't just become locked-in practices, but that they continue to respond to changing context. And the quote there is from the SVP of, SVP of software development, who left a few weeks ago. And this was his Unruly blog post where he reflected on what it was like to work at a single place for 9 years. And I see the impact of this day to day. And he was a huge Star Trek fan, hence anybody who knows him will understand. So we find that people will do stand-ups, but then they don't really understand why we're doing a stand-up. What's the goal? And they start to do it in a cargo culty kind of way. We all, and I don't just mean unrulies, we all like rules and certainty. And one of my struggles as a CTO is to get the team more comfortable at living in the grey, not in the black or the white, but in this ambiguous space in the middle. But you'll see if you came to Unruly that everybody likes to know how we work. So new people like to understand, what do you mean when you say we pair? What is that? How do you pair? How do you write tests? How do you write code? And the simplest way to respond to that is to say, here is the answer. Okay? This is how we pair. We pair all the time, and we do it like this, and maybe there's a driver navigator metaphor or whatever, because I don't get involved in that. But here's the way we do it. Just keep doing that and you'll be fine. And on the flip side, we would like, because we're people, for words to mean the same thing. So when I say pairing, it means the same thing as when you say pairing. Or when I say test-driven development, it means the same thing as when you say test-driven development. And it's also easy to teach and people feel like they're progressing. Oh, okay, now I understand pairing, and now I understand TDD, and now I understand this. The problem is that's great, and if you're in an organization that's trying to transition or transform to agile, you're probably thinking, oh, that would be fantastic. It would be fantastic if everybody paired and everybody had a consistent idea of what pairing means. The trouble is that that's not sufficient It's necessary as a starting point. And if, excuse me, if you're familiar with Dreyfus, who's familiar with the Dreyfus model of skills acquisition? Okay, should all be familiar with that model. Essentially, we're locked in at this novice stage where everybody knows a way to do things. But the law of requisite variety says that if you're trying to control a system, and in my view, the development teams are trying to control a system which includes software and the developers and the people who use the software, like it's one big system that they're trying to control, the number of responses you have, the variety of responses must be at least as large as the number of states in the system. Okay? Otherwise, you don't know what to do effectively in a given context. So what's an example of that kind of thing? If I, as a manager, always shout at people regardless of what's going on, right? Good days, shout. Bad days, shout more. Okay? That's my response. All I do is dial up or down the shouting. That's not terribly useful, and that's clearly not useful. But nor is only having one response on the other extreme, where I say, everything's great, and all I do is dial up and down the level of cheerleading. Right? Some days I need to be a cheerleader, some days I need to be shouty, some days I need to do other things, because I'm dealing with a really complex system. I need to have a variety of responses. And the same thing applies for developers using XP practices. So we like to, let's go through pair programming from a couple of perspectives. We like to pair all the time. There are lots of benefits to doing that. It's easy to explain. There's maximum shared context. If we pair all the time, or we mob all the time, everybody understands the context, that's great. We maximize knowledge transfer, that's good. And if we know where we're going, that's really, really effective. Like, I know where I'm going, so I can pull you along, we can swap over, you can pull me the next part of the trip. That's great. But there are downsides. Some people need to fail alone. I'm one of them. If I'm pairing, I don't like to reveal my ignorance. I will go along for the ride. And if I never get an opportunity to try things by myself, then I never get an opportunity to display my ignorance and fail and learn from that. So that's our downside. We also find that if you, and also I've got to give context, I guess, we have people in our organization who have never done anything except agile, who have never done anything but pair all the time, who have never done anything but TDD. And some of those people are relatively new, but some of them have been there for 5 or 6 years. And this is their environment, okay? So what we've observed is that this leads in some sense, in some context, to rapid learning, but in other places it lets people down. Some people don't learn how to lead because there was never any need to do that. Okay? Some people, in other contexts, they're coupled to this single pace. Like, well, you and I can only go at the pace that we can both manage. But if I've got a lot more experience, I might be capable of going faster. But I can't. And sometimes that's frustrating. Also, if you only pair and you have two completely different ideas on how to proceed, you might not get an opportunity to investigate. I've got this really good idea, but my pair seems really, really confident we'll just go that way. So we don't get necessarily the variety of investigation we would like. So even though we pair all the time, there are benefits to doing pairing, there are benefits to doing solo development, and knowing when to do one or the other is really difficult. But we need people, to maximize effectiveness, we need people to be able to make those kinds of decisions. So it's tricky. If you come in as a new hire, I've seen people come in, day one, sit down, start pairing, release to production, break the production system on their first day, and then learn how we recover from that, and go home a little bit wrung out. But boy, did they learn a lot on that day. I'm thinking of one person in particular. So the upside is you're immediately part of the value chain, you immediately feel like you're contributing something. And if we want to get somebody up to the point where they can deliver features, that's probably the best way to do it. But on the other hand, you've just turned up and people have said, here's the whole stack. Here's everything. just learn that. Is that okay? Maybe. Some people respond to that as a challenge. Some people are a little bit overwhelmed. We managed to bring all those people, we managed to get those two things to converge, but it takes time. And again, I don't get to fail, I don't get to experiment, because I'm always pairing. So gold cards are one safety valve for that. Some people use their gold card time to work on things just that they would have done with a pair, but they work on them alone. That's useful. And people grow quickly, but they miss some skills. So here's what sort of the summary slide. We do XP, we do agile. No argument that we do it. Compared to lots of other places I've been to, it's obvious. But there are times when we're not being agile because we don't have the necessary variety of responses to be agile. We need to know more things to choose from and how to choose from those things. And that's really, really hard. It's harder than an agile transformation on the same scale organization, whether that's one team or whether it's 5 teams or whatever. Okay, so other bits and things that might surprise you. We don't track code coverage. Code coverage metrics, I don't know what our code coverage is. We don't have code quality inspections. But we pair all the time and the pairs rotate and people tell me that everything is fine and our production systems are not disintegrating. So that's okay. And it may change. We are going through lots of interesting conversations, having gone from 35 people to 75 people. Some people go, you don't have a CI pipeline. How can that be right? Everyone else has a CI pipeline. Well, just because everybody else does it doesn't mean that we're going to do it. But maybe now we should. Maybe there would be some benefits. But again, we try to maximize productivity by leaving stuff out and looking at the ramifications. So we try to apply cultural solutions rather than process or technical solutions where we can. Planning, the way we plan has very little relationship to anything you'll read in a book. That thing on the right, if I had one of those in the office, people would, there would be pitchforks and hysteria. We've tried different approaches to planning. We keep trying different approaches. This year, we've been planning in 2 streams, one of which is tactical and one of which is strategic. So we constrain tactical work to a cross-team feature, like a feature team that we put together every couple of weeks with people from different parts of the organization. It's about 4 people plus a team lead. That's it. That's the constraint. We pick a quarterly goal for the rest of the development team, like we are going to do X. And then we get the whole of development to self-organize around that goal. But that needs to be balanced with short-term goals, long-term goals, medium-term goals. So we expect the teams to be continuously delivering features, but we also expect them to be doing architectural improvements, and we also expect them to be continuing with innovation and long-term research, but we leave the balance up to the teams. Yeah. So that's very interesting. Right now, we have an architecture that's essentially 12 years old, and at the beginning of Unruly's history, it wasn't we're going to form a company to create a video marketplace. It was, we have this business idea, let's try it. Oh, that didn't work, let's pivot to this. Well, that didn't work, let's pivot to that. And I have seen Benji, who was there for 9 years, give an explanation of our architecture in terms of pivots. Okay? The architecture doesn't make sense for what we do now, but it totally made sense for what we did. You know? So we know that we need to change our orientation. Right now we have between 4 and 6 teams, depending on how you count them, who are focused around particular parts of the software, but they don't align very well to the business as it stands. And one of our medium-term goals is to evolve the architecture to be more aligned to the current business. This leads to some interesting social impacts. Who's aware of what I would call either the first law of attribution or the fundamental law of attribution in psychology? Oh, a couple, but not very many. And those hands only went to there, like, oh, maybe. So here's my summary of the fundamental law of attribution. I do things because of the context in which I've been placed, especially if they're mistakes. Like, I make mistakes because of context. You make mistakes because you're idiots. And this is not unruly, this is not software developers, this is just human beings. Ever cut somebody off in a car? Why did you do it? Because you were in a rush, because you were distracted by the kids, but whatever. Have you ever been cut off by somebody in traffic? Why did they do it? Because they were a moron. In software, this makes it, people have a lot of trouble distinguishing between something that was once appropriate but maybe isn't in the current context, and something that was always stupid. I was reminded of it when Tricia was talking about the code reviews. Right? I'm always harder on somebody else's code than I am on my own. I'm always harder on other people's historical decisions. So we have to do a lot of work to separate those two things out and assume positive intent and that everybody was doing the right thing in the past. We strongly believe that medium and long-term success comes from elegance. So referring back to maybe what we would call craft. We think that that's essential. And it's so baked into the DNA that I have to force people to do things that are not elegant. So in the not so distant past, someone did some work in a couple of hours that saved our operations team 100 to 200 hours of work. That sounds beneficial, right? But everyone agreed that it was unmaintainable. And it took ages for people to actually go, oh, well, I'm going to do this, even though it's unmaintainable, because it delivers obvious business benefit, and we can use all that business benefit to write a nicer one later. Yeah? But it just wasn't elegant, and people resist. So craftsmanship is great, but it sometimes gets over-interpreted because we need to deliver value to the business. So that's the example. The other thing that happens over a long time is that success leads to ignorance. We have services that have been happily churning away for 2 or 3 years, and then something changes in the context. Usually it's because the business keeps growing, and at some point, the design that made complete sense in the past breaks. And people go, haven't ever seen that service before, didn't even know it existed. Where are all the people who worked on it? Well, they've all moved on. So sometimes we're the victims of our own success, and it's very difficult to figure out when to document stuff like that. I mean, it never made sense to document it while I was in development because everyone was pairing and mobbing and we were doing everything collaboratively and everybody understood the context. So no problem. Probably doesn't make sense to document the whole thing now because we just need to make a small change to get everything running again. It's an ongoing struggle. In some sense, if we'd been doing handovers, everything would be better because at least we'd have some record of the handover. Not that I'm advocating for that. But there are downsides. Yeah, we talked about from the future perspective and fundamental attribution error. I get a lot of this is rubbish, whoever wrote this. Why? We need to completely replace this. And it might be true now, but it wasn't true in the past. We also do a lot of psychology-related work. We care a lot about technology, we care a lot about the quality of our code, but we also care a lot about our people. So the whole company is arranged around Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is an interesting book to read, and around organising teams that minimise the dysfunctions that Lencioni identifies. We care about psychological safety a lot. We care about feedback within the teams. We think that giving feedback is a skill that all developers need to have. So a couple of our teams have sessions they call feedback with cake. So someone brings in a cake and everybody shares cake and then we sit down and say, so Steve, when you did that this week, it sort of had this impact on me and I'd rather that you didn't do that. And here's another slice of cake. Okay. Thank you very much. We also record lots of working agreements. So when we come out of retrospectives and we understand that some practice should be changed, that gets added or removed from our working agreements. So every team will have a set of working agreements, which varies in length. Now this introduces a bunch of extra challenges, like now you've got a list of working agreements. How do you track whether you're actually abiding by the working agreements? Is that a team responsibility? Is that an individual responsibility? How do you call people to account if they're not keeping to the working agreements? This is all psychology. This is not code. Okay, so there's going to be plenty of times for questions because I'm sure that I've not addressed the things that you're thinking about. Okay, so for me, having many years of agile in a like transformational context, Unruly is an excellent window into the challenges of long-term XP practices, particularly in the startup context, where things have pivoted a number of times. I get to look at what life is like once you've gone through an agile transformation, and that's really cool. You know, like life goal achieved. That's great. And that is indeed why I went to Unruly, so that I could see this. Nothing we do at Unruly is special. Like, it's not because we picked a particular set of tools. It's not because we hire specific people. There's no special source other than management is committed to this style of approach. And one really cool thing about being the CT at Unruly, nobody tells me how to do stuff. What to do, yes, but how to do it is entirely up to the development team as a whole. And we work hard on trying to set a direction at the top and letting practices come from the bottom up and meeting somewhere nicely in the middle. And we do that some days really well and some days not, right? We are far short of perfect, but we do really well. And we aspire to continually get better. But you have we have generations of people coming through Unruly even in 12 years. Right? A bunch of people leave, another bunch of people come in. There are also some interesting things about having those that I talked about people who have only done agile or extreme programming. They've never ever seen waterfall go badly. Right? Now I have this grey stuff that comes from having seen waterfall go badly. So everything has problems, so they respond to, well, this is not perfect. Like, we get to the end of a lengthy sprint and we didn't deliver everything that the business would have liked because we ran out of time. We did some really good stuff, but maybe it would be really useful if they wrote down everything that they need at the beginning. And I'm like, no. I understand why you want to do that. I understand why that looks like a sensible way to approach this particular failure, although we can argue about whether it's a failure. But that way lies madness. Let's not go back and do that. But it's like they've never seen anything else. They've never seen waterfall go bad, and the ramifications of that, they've only experienced agile. So, fascinating. So, that's it for the prepared part. 10 minutes, I hope, to ask questions. And I'll be around at lunchtime if you want to pin me down and ask something else. There's one there. That was the first hand.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I'm curious as to your hiring practice, because clearly that's going to require, to keep that culture, you need to be very careful about the personalities and like that you're hiring. Is there, how do you find that out?
Shall I describe, who would like to hear our hiring practices? Oh, enough, okay. So here's how we hire. If you want to come and work at Unruly, here's what we do. You come in, first we do a phone screen. We just check that people can actually talk about what's on their resume in a coherent way. Most people get through that. And then we bring people in for face-to-face interviews in our environment. So they go and sit in ProDev, and there's a design exercise and a resume review. And then we do an hour's pairing in Java, and then we do an hour's pairing in JavaScript. And we do the same thing for everybody, regardless of seniority. We just expect different levels of responses. And then we sit down we do a huddle around and discuss everybody's experiences. And the things we look for were they able to explain what they were doing? Did they pick things up well? If you can sit down and with no JavaScript experience, we'll still put you through the JavaScript interview. And the first step is, well, here you go, here's what JavaScript syntax looks like. Let's start working on this problem together. And we look at the questions you ask. And somebody who is experienced, we give feedback as part of the pair, and we see how people respond to the feedback. So we've never rejected anybody on the basis of cultural fit, which sends, that whole expression sends shivers down my spine. But we have said this person was defensive and really reluctant to take any feedback. Or this person just didn't pick up this thing that we were explaining. It would be a lot of work to try to bring them up to speed. So, we do it in the actual working environment. So there was one famous person who said, we were happy with them, but they came back and said, no, we don't want to work at Unruly because you're too agile. Okay, that's fine. And some people decide that the physical environment is not for them. And I have revealing my thinking. One other thing is I'm not a top-down CTO, and a lot of my team have trouble, especially the more junior people, I think, have a bit of trouble with the idea that I disagree with things that go on in ProDev, but I don't change them. I don't try to enforce my will upon the development team. I will say, I think this is a bit dodgy, and then we'll see what people do with it. So I do worry that because we pair all the time, that we're excluding a whole set of people who are not happy in that. Neurodiversity is one aspect of diversity, and I don't think that right now we're terribly supportive of that. But we should address that, but I don't know how to right now. This will also impact us because I think a requirement of the modern workforce is to support remote work. We do not support remote work. People do their 20%, their gold card time. People do gold carding from home. So most people do work from home 1 day a week. But because we pair on everything, as by default, we will need people in at the office at 9:30 and we work through till 6. And we don't pair for that whole time, but those are the core office hours. And that's probably not going to work. But again, I don't know how to address that right now. I just know it's a problem. Does that help?
Thank you.
Next, anything else? Nope, wherever.
Hi, thanks very much.
Then over there.
That was quite refreshing, to be honest. Just a good question, because you mentioned now that the management team is quite happy with the results. And
no, I didn't actually say that. I said
Okay.
they let me do things the way I wanted to.
Okay, it's getting there. So my question would be, because you said that the length of the sprints may vary depending on what you guys are working. So do you find sometimes that you have some problems with the predictability of the time that something is gonna last for you to deliver? So instead of deliver every 2 weeks a small parts of functionality,
Yeah.
do you find sometimes that it's hard to convince the management team or the business team that might take longer to reach production, or?
First, we release multiple times a day. And even when we're doing a quarterly goal, we still deliver incremental benefit many, many times during that period. But that's a small thing. They believe us when we tell them how long it will take. And sometimes it's estimation. So sometimes we're over and sometimes we're under. But we don't have conversations about that doesn't make any sense. Well, we do sometimes, but just normal. One of the things is I come from lots of things. Over 30 years, I've done quite a lot of different things. But my experience just before Unruly was investment banks. Yeah? And I came to Unruly not as the CTO, as another role. And I went into my first planning meeting. And I walked out going, that was so collegial. Like everybody asked relevant questions, but it wasn't aggressive. It wasn't pushy. There were no hidden agendas that I could detect. Everybody was just trying to make the best decision with the inherently uncertain information that we had. And that's been consistently the case. It's not nirvana. We have strong competitors. When I talk about evolutionary arms races and pull out biology examples to illustrate why we cannot rest on our laurels. No matter how fast we go, our competitors will be continually trying to go faster, and we need to keep up. So there's absolutely not the case that the business is happy with our development pace. They would love us to go faster, and we will find ways to go faster. But it's all a very collegial conversation.
Thanks.
Someone over there went a couple of times. Far side, on the far side over there. Yep. There goes the microphone.
Hi, this might be a bit of a boring question for a few people in the room, but do you have any difficulty evaluating individual performance when you do constantly pair programming?
Why would I evaluate individual performance?
Well, I'm guessing there's going to be raises and all of that that come in a yearly review. Do you do that? Do you not do that? How do you handle that?
Sometimes I'm tempted to be flippant and say, no, we never give anybody any extra money at all, but we do. So we're keen, we give people continual feedback. So feedback and cake is team within team, but I have regular conversations with my team leads about the feedback that they're giving to the people in their teams. So everybody gets feedback. I mean, again, we're not perfect at that. Some of those conversations are uncomfortable and get pushed off, and et cetera, et cetera. But we give continuous feedback. Interestingly enough, the rest of the company does quarterly reviews and we don't. And that predates me. That was the status quo when I arrived. We do give annual reviews. I've only been, pay reviews, not personal reviews. I've only been there for one of those cycles. We sat down with all the team leads and everybody's salaries and just tried to figure it out. I'm not terribly happy with that process, but that's what I did last year. I now have somebody in my team whose primary responsibility is what I call the developer life cycle. He is responsible for helping us get better at our branding, doing more stuff like this, at refining our hiring processes to make them more effective and more fit for purpose, and then making sure that people have an appropriate experience when they're inside the organization and in keeping touch with our alumni. And one of the things he has to do, hi Rob, is that he has to try to figure out a better review process for next year. Yep. Any more? Oh, some.
Okay, so we've got another one here. Do we have the microphone in the... Can you ask one? Where's our microphone gone to? Hello.
Hey. Hey.
I have a question. You mentioned, so the whole talk was about what if you take XP practices to extreme and what potentially could go wrong. That's my kind of small takeaway. It's just one takeaway out of many. But you mentioned the example of someone did some quick hack and it saved us millions and people were not happy about that.
It wasn't millions,
well,
but I'd take it. If it was millions, I'd definitely have
I know,
one.
100 hours.
Yeah.
My question is, I hear these stories all the time, and then people justify not doing the right practices because, hey, someone did it really quickly, and then it saved us so much time, hours, etc. But how? And I think for this conference, this is an important question. What would it take to do it properly? And what is properly, right? Let's say test-driven development and et cetera,
properly.
et cetera.
The whole that word properly is very, very subjective, right?
Sure, yeah.
So we had a problem that was going to take someone 100 to 200 hours to solve manually that day.
Okay.
So it was either write it that day or suck up the 100 or 200 hours of work. So we wrote it, and I'm happy for it to be tossed away. I don't want people to maintain it. I'm happy for people to keep using it, and when it gets to the point where it needs to be changed, we'll just toss it. And by that point, our ROI is sufficient to do a nice one. But we may never need it again. And I'm certainly not advocating hacky all the time. And this is the dilemma from my perspective, like the repeated dilemma is pairing a good thing? Yeah, most of the time, but not always. Is writing clean code, and I just quoted Bob almost, and he's standing at the back of the room, and now I'm nervous. But frozen in his place. Because there's multiple threads going on. I think the more experience you get at writing clean code, the faster it is. And I personally think I'm faster by doing it right than I am by doing it hacky.
Yeah.
But that's a result of experience. That's not true for everyone at every point. Yeah? And since I don't want to write code all the time, I have to delegate to people with less experience.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I want them to learn how to do it right, and I want that to be the default, but I don't want them to ignore things that give me millions of % ROI because it doesn't fit their predetermined criteria on what right looks like. But those decisions need to be conscious. I get really angry when we've slipped into a thing. I do the 5-year-old thing. Why are we doing this? And if there's a good answer, then I'm happy. Like, here's this used to be an interview question for team leads. If your team comes to you and says, we don't want to pair on this thing, and the thing was, we need to switch from mocking framework A to mocking framework B for reasons, and it's across our whole test base, but it's mechanical. And the team suggests that we should not pair on that. Instead, we should work solo after we've established a pattern, and then we should just come together once a day and compare our results, but we shouldn't pair. As a team lead, what would you say? And I have multiple candidates who say, no, that's unacceptable. They have to pair on everything. But I also have the real life example where we had that conversation and we decided not to pair for that context. And it was a debate. And then we moved forwards, we didn't pair, there were no problems. We finished it much faster, got to the same end goal, and we deployed and we moved on to doing other things, right? And this is, but if the same team, if I'd gone to them and said, you're not pairing on this, why are you not pairing on that? And they just went, oh, I don't know, it didn't seem like the right thing. Like, I would, I would be upset. So I know that I'm out of time now and I'm keeping you from your lunch, which is a terrible, terrible thing. So certainly I'll be around to ask questions. Thank you very much.